What's Gianna think about you doing the old podcast?
Oh, she got a kick out of
That's
it.
funny. Yeah, I figured she'd think it's funny.
Wow, what's up? I had some goofy backgrounds I tried earlier, but it didn't quite work.
And then Tom's always got his patented sleeveless shirt on,
Oh yes.
fresh off his weed nap.
Just waking up.
You got to get a quick snoozer in before we can get started.
I was actually watching more of the Dark Side.
Oh, okay. Just rewatching or other episodes?
No, rewatching it.
Perfect.
Cool. You guys ready to do this thing?
Let's do it.
Welcome to this episode of the Prestige-ish Media Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lake, and with me I have two special guests. One is a returning guest. He's an oldie but a goodie, Tom Chan. Tom, how are you this evening?
I am just peachy yet again.
And also a newcomer. We've got Inbred Ed, Bird, Pat Boggess, all the names. How's it going today, Bird?
Bringing a little West Virginia flavor here. Glad to be here, fellas.
So tell me a little bit about Lobster and how that started and how we started the wrestling chat. And for people new to our show, we normally cover prestige adjacent TV. So recent shows, we're currently covering Game of Thrones. About once a year, we do some true crime type series. We did Paradise Lost a couple years ago, which I know Bird here watched a while ago. And anyway, long story short, we're going to be covering Dark Side of the Ring. You can still catch us for HBO, but this is a different show. So I wanted to introduce the co-host so you have a background on how we met, and then we'll get into the show. So explain the Lobster group to a newcomer, Bird.
Okay, so this is going to be pretty dorky here. Hopefully you can hear me okay. But
if anybody's listening to a podcast review of a wrestling show, I assume dorky is already covered, but go ahead.
I think we're already checked that box. So let's swing back to the mid-90s, the 1995 for me. Tom, Blaha, right around that same time period, within the first year or two I was there, we had a little group on MIRC chat, IRC. It was a basketball chat room, and we'd be there for hours every day till 2, 3 in the morning, just a group of us. And we've all kind of, the first guy that I remember on there was Spree, who's no longer really around our group. But I mean, you, Wilbur, there's a bunch of OGs that are still around 30 years later, which is crazy. So that kind of ties us. Once that all died out, we jumped out to some more WhatsApps and things like that, where we have groups and things of that nature, where we have groups of that, and we've just all stuck together.
And so I feel like it was like around 20, I want to say 13-ish, you guys got into the G chats and you started a Raw chat, which is just our wrestling chat overall. And so that's kind of how I got lured in. Now, on the Sandman podcast, you're known as Inbred Ed, but do you go by Pat? Do you go by Ed? What's the preferred title here?
So it's a funny thing. Ed's a nickname, and I'll get into that another time. Half of the people know me as Pat, which is my real middle name, Patrick.
Okay.
Ed's been a nickname I've had since third grade. Some people only know me as that. And then,
okay.
Of course, you guys know me as Bird, so just because I'm a big Larry Bird guy.
Okay, so we'll either catch Ed or Bird on our side.
Yep.
Tom is also known by Blaha. And then, as you know, on my Instagram, Real Batman. So sometimes they'll call me Real, but try to use names here. But that's the dorky background. Now, I am a WWE fan. I started watching, I feel like I was about 8 years old in late 91. So I came in, my first pay-per-view was Survivor Series in 91 when Hogan lost to The Undertaker, and then watched from then on. And then I back researched as much WWE wrestling as I could. So every time I could rent a video, we didn't have a ton of money, so you could always pick one video, right? So of course I'm going to pick a 3-hour wrestling pay-per-view versus a 1-hour cartoon video or something else. So I kind of got the wrestling history that way. I had a few books, like I had some WCW trading cards. I had some picture books, or I'd get a Pro Wrestling Illustrated here or there, but I really didn't follow anything besides WWE or WWE wrestlers, which was then WWF. So I'm coming at it for that background. Tom, when did you start watching wrestling, and what did you watch more often than not?
Pretty much same as you, just being a WWE, WWF guy. And I don't remember the first time I started watching wrestling, or at least WWF. I do remember watching, I think Bird would know, was it WCCW back in the day? It used to be like on ESPN after school in
After
the
school,
afternoon.
yes.
Yeah. So I remember watching that very young, but I don't remember my first WWE show. I just remember my neighbor across the street would always record the pay-per-views and give me a copy the next day.
Yeah, and that was the deal back then because you had to pay. I don't know. I wasn't rich enough.
And then how long did you have to wait for it to be on tape after the pay-per-view?
It was a while, but
Yeah.
usually I had an uncle who would send me pay-per-views. I actually had an uncle in Tampa who he would always send me WCW pay-per-views because he had a box, but sometimes he'd flip over to the inappropriate channels or whatever. And so that was like my WCW watching. But yeah, first show I ever tuned in for was Superstars with the Ultimate Warrior getting locked in the casket by the Undertaker. So I was always a big Ultimate Warrior guy. And then after that, the next hook that finally brought me in full time was the Jake the Snake Macho Man replay on Superstars of the Snake Bite. And so those were really the two that kind of hooked me and brought me in. Bird, you're a little bit more wider ranging. Also, to be clear, both these guys about 5 years older than me. But how would you describe your wrestling background to people?
So again, West Virginia. So are we in the north? Are we in the south? I consider us more southern based as far as wrestling fans. So basically, what started me at that time, let's say 1985 range, Dusty versus Flair, hooked, absolutely hooked. My dad would have it on TV, and he liked that era for a couple of years, but I wouldn't say he was a big fan. So I loved the NWA at that time. Of course, I was watching all the WWF stuff. Hogan was gigantic, Savage, all that issue, things of that nature. I like any and all wrestling. I'm not really too picky, and I watch some pure trash these days and some stuff that's really good either way. The ECW in the 90s is my wheelhouse. A little territory wrestling even before that. I don't miss any WWE today like you guys, same kind of deal. So that's basically what hooked me would be Dusty versus Flair feud, I would say.
Yeah, I think Hulk Hogan was really what got me into WWF. Obviously, he was the most popular guy.
Yeah, and I've kind of always liked the second most popular. So like I was a Magic Johnson versus a Michael Jordan guy. You guys like Bird, which is, Celtics fans. Surprised we even let you guys talk. I think my favorite story about Tom is what's the story with the 1-900 hotline?
So if people don't know, 900 numbers back in the day are like numbers that you call where they charge your phone bill. So as a kid, I didn't know any better. And you see all these commercials on WWF TV saying, get all the hot news by calling this number. And one day I was my parents were visiting my uncle. And I went out into the bedroom and dialed the 900 number like several times. And I got in trouble with their phone bill.
Yeah. Especially Chinese family ain't gonna tolerate running up the phone bill, that's for sure. Now, is your dad the Italian person in your family, Bird, or where does that side come from?
That's my mom's side on that.
Okay, so your dad wasn't like a Bruno guy or anything like that
No,
at
I didn't
all?
grow up really traditional. I got more of the sports vibe from dad than I did wrestling. Just wrestling kind of came crazy, just kind of came to me. And I know one of your favorite guys of all time, Mick Foley. Sarcasm to you, even though I'm a big Foley guy. A small world, a little town called Clarksburg, West Virginia, which is just right around the corner from Shinston. He had his first match there, and I was just a little guy. I was there for his first match for whatever.
Oh, that's really cool.
That is.
Yeah, and to be clear, there's a lot of things I like about Foley. I think sometimes as he's gotten older, he's complained a little bit more about various issues, and that's kind of where I get down on him. But I read both of his first two books. I popped when he won the title, but some of the song and dance as people get older. And that's the other thing I'd say if you're listening to this, we're just here to joke around and have a good time and talk about stuff. Unfortunately, when you're talking about real life people, sometimes you could take that wrong or whatever. We're just talking about this like it's a TV show. I get there's real feelings and real people involved. So if you're offended by any of that, apologize in advance, but we're going to joke around and have a good time with it ideally. But we get these are real people, and some of the stuff we say may not even be how we feel. It's just joking around, that kind of stuff. And we'll try to take the stuff that needs to be serious, but in the same instance, we want to have a good time. That fair enough for you too as well?
I suppose, was it Cactus Jack back then?
Yes. And there's actually a Mexican restaurant nearby, right across the corner from a place called Cactus Jack's. But apparently that's not where he got his name from, but who knows?
Who's to say? That rip-off artist, that piece of shit. I was just kidding, obviously. So we're here to talk about Dark Side of the Ring. So if you got through this whole dog and pony show to get where we are now, congratulations. This is season 7, episode 1. We're talking about Jeff Jarrett and the battle for TNA. Depending on how you look at it, this was like a 2-part of 3-part series, or episode 1 of 2 parts, but this one was longer. My understanding from the creators, I haven't done a lot of background on this. I know Bird Corney usually does, Jim Cornette does a podcast preview for the whole season, usually every season. I haven't listened to that, especially because we were going to record. I didn't want to listen to too much. But the thing that I know is, I guess they were originally going to try to do a TNA documentary by itself, 6 episodes. I think we all know Vice has been struggling for a couple of years. So instead of doing a 6-parter, like 6 sides of TNA, like The Ring, they got it in Dark Side as like a Jeff Jarrett 3-parter is kind of how they landed on this. Do you got initial thoughts and a rating on the first part of this episode? Tom, I'll let you go first since you've done this before.
Yeah, when I watched the episode, I thought it was going to be a TNA thing, but after watching this first 2 episodes, or first part, I kind of thought it was one-sided.
I don't think that's unfair.
Yeah, but overall, to be fair, I don't really know much about TNA. I talked to Greg about it before, but I didn't really watch it. I've only heard stuff or reading stuff online. And I think around that time when it started, I wasn't really watching wrestling that much. But for the first episode, I would probably give it an 8 because a lot of stuff was new to me.
Bird, you got thoughts and a rating to start out?
I sure kind of wing this a little bit. First of all, we all love Dark Side. It could be any topic, and we're probably going to be locked in. Some of what you would think would be bad episodes turned out to be pretty good. I still watch TNA every week, me and probably 5 other people. But I've watched TNA pretty much all the way through. There's good, there's bad. I could see where Blaha thought the one-sided thing with Jarrett. Me, I'm a Jarrett guy, whether you guys are or aren't. So I get some of where they went with that. I thought it was very well done. Definitely worthy 8 out of 10 to every bit of. So I got some comments once we go through the episode, of course, but I thought it was well done.
Damn, we got a triple crown here. I've got it as an 8 too. I think the downsides to me is a lot of this stuff, I feel like we've seen. Some of the TNA stuff was new, but it's not like they went real deep in TNA lore. I would say maybe the stuff between Jarrett and his dad is probably some of the newer stuff for me. Were you watching TNA from the beginning, Bird? I can't imagine you shelling out $9.99 a week. That doesn't seem like your speed, but what was your original experience with TNA?
Yeah, so at that time, everybody would just pile at somebody's house and either pitch in or somebody would have a free card. Basically, on that probably time period, we would do a lot of the weekly pay-per-views. I'd go to somebody's house that week, and we'd do that. So it wasn't like I was shelling out, sitting by myself. A little different vibe, but I was watching those at that time.
In 2020, I could see you spending $9.99,
yes.
But not back then.
Yeah.
Inflation $9.99 maybe. But yeah, I tried to follow it. And right around then, I feel like they were at the same time. Was it that XPW that tried to start up? Is that what it was? And I think they even did a Dark Side on that, didn't they? Or no? Or was it just in an episode?
Yeah, that was right around early TNA. Probably didn't get a whole lot of attention. I'd say your bigger stuff started happening in 04, 05, 06. You'd have Samoa Joe once we get to that stuff. When it kind of became TNA, early days was pretty wild and crazy, trial by error. So it wasn't like they were hitting the ground running, but there was some good, but there was also some bad.
When I came from a WWE that didn't really recognize the other stuff. So like from my side, not a lot of experience caring about the big gold championship. It always looked cheap to me. As a WWE fan, I knew it as the generic belt Flair brought in. I can say that I did like early Jeff Jarrett. I liked later Jeff Jarrett in WWE. But anyway, when TNA started, I wasn't going to pay $9.99 a week for sure. I feel like when it went on Spike, I tried it here or there, but I just never really got into it. And then once I felt the six-sided ring was gimmicky, I feel like I bought one pay-per-view maybe ever, but it just never really was my thing. And I've just, full disclosure, mainly been a WWE guy. So we get this intro overall, some of the characters like Sinister Minister. I don't know if he was describing Jeff. I think he described Jeff as a carny with a heart of gold.
Yeah.
What do you know about Sinister Minister, Bird? What's your experience with him?
I took a couple of notes during this show. So as an ECW guy, Sinister Minister is just a different cat altogether. It's what you see is what you get. I thought he was one of the stars of the show just for the cameo purposes and what he would say. I thought fairly knowledgeable. I don't think he was holding back. Not that he was trying to be rough with it, but I think that's kind of his style. But I thought he came across on TV well. But for people that don't know him, that's pretty much what you're getting. But I think he plays that character well.
Yeah, he seemed to be pretty level-headed in this, and some of how he described the industry. Obviously, in different regards, we're all outsiders, but some of us have had more involvement than others. But it seemed like he had accurate descriptions. He wasn't pulling any punches. He wasn't going over the top. He wasn't in character. It didn't seem. He seemed like he was shooting pretty straight. Jim Cornette makes appearances here. He says Jeff Jarrett can sell you the glasses off your face, I think was the quote. I'm like, we don't really get into politics on this show. Corny loves to get into politics, but outside of that, I enjoy him a lot. I think, Bird, you'd probably admit me and Corny's wrestling opinions align more than you would ever think they would. But you're a big Cornette guy too. Any comments on Cornette here?
I love having him on every show. I think I don't know if he's the star of every show, but he's very knowledgeable, whether you love Corny, you hate Corny. He knows the game. So I thought he had some very good insights as usual, and he always adds to the show, in my opinion.
I like him. I don't listen to his podcast, so I don't have any opinion on him outside of wrestling, really. But during this episode, he was really fun to listen to or watch. And they should just do one episode of him and Russo debating.
Yeah, the Montreal Screwjob episode, if anybody goes back and watches that, I'm pretty sure is basically half him and Russo. They start this with talking about this, like TNA pissing off Vince originally. What's your take on that, Bird? Because I believe that he was pissed, and rightfully, at Jarrett for how Jarrett conducted himself. But he also did hire Jarrett later, before he was at the end of his WWE run. Vince and Jarrett kind of ended around the same time. But I don't think Vince cared when TNA opened up originally. Where do you fall on that?
I totally agree with that. It was probably just a little ant in the pond there. He was fired up with the Jarrett thing. Jarrett played that well to get, if that's the true story, how many couple 100,000 to roll him out of there for the loss to China. That's pretty smart. But Vince also, you don't play around with Vince. He's going to get the last word, whether you like Vince or not. I'm a Vince guy. Even whatever he's doing nowadays is a little different kind of style. But as far as business, I wouldn't want to cross him, but I don't think he was ever really worried. But he wanted to put the nail in him maybe, and just didn't really care about him probably, especially the early days.
Yeah, and I would argue, I almost think TKO cares more about competition than old Vince did. You know what I mean? I feel like he was less restrictive than TKO. So I just think that's funny. I'm a Vince guy too. Everybody's always down on Vince, but he's never as good as people. It's like anything. It's never as good as anybody thinks it is, and it's never as bad as anybody thinks it is. And he seems to have a very extreme personality on both sides, but he does land in the middle a lot. It seems like you couldn't be as successful as he has been without that. We're going to hear from Awesome Kong. We're going to hear from Kurt's new wife, that is Kurt Angle's old wife, Jeff Jarrett's current wife. And to the one-sided side, I do think it's one-sided, but also Dixie didn't want to be interviewed, but they didn't take like a Pritchard interview for a WWE side on Jarrett. They didn't really,
No.
they didn't really cover any other side. Any other thoughts there, Tom?
Yeah, they could have had more. I didn't know about Dixie not wanting to be interviewed, but it makes sense. But then, like, from what they were how they were talking about her, you definitely would think of it's one sided. But I remember from the things I read back in the day about her, it was staying true from what they're saying. But I thought it was really interesting with the Vince and Jeff Jarrett deal. And then I forgot about Vince firing Jeff Jarrett on TV like that too.
Yeah, I think that the Jarrett thing was pretty inappropriate. I get getting the first 100, and you never know what Jarrett's saying Vince owed him that. But from all accounts, Vince has been pretty fair traditionally with payouts. What that he owes me means, I wonder. So he not say the first 100 was justified. How do you justify going back for the second 100 for a guy that won't pay more than $10 for a t-shirt? Bird, aside from the humor of it, where do you stand on that hold up there?
I love the whole spectacle of just the wrestling world, that your average person probably has no idea how crazy and nuts and how many of these stories are even partially true, all the way true. But I will say, I'll back up a little bit. I thought Karen Jarrett was locked and loaded. She was ready. She wanted to tell that story, and I thought she came across on TV well, but she was fired up. Based on her side, I get it. From what everybody was saying, her and Kurt weren't an item at that time. They were just playing that as is, and Dixie didn't have a clue. Who knows? I don't know what's true and not of that. But I thought Karen's stuff was very enjoyable, at least from what we've not seen before come out from her.
Because it makes it more like reality TV for Bird.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I would say is, if you're not into wrestling, I think this show is a good gateway either to get into it or just to watch it, because it is to understand how other people like it, because the behind the scenes is almost or more interesting than anything that's going on in the ring sometimes. I'm not going to get too far into it, but I did find it interesting. Every step of the way, Jarrett was like, and then my real drinking began. And it was like, first it was Owen, then it was the job thing. And I feel bad for Karen, because obviously they allude to it, but Kurt Angle I think he is lovingly called Perk Angle by fans, but he does not like that title. But I think people mean it in a more endearing way than he takes it. But I get that it's not a joke to him. But I just feel bad that she had to go from that. And now at the end of this episode, Jeff Jarrett's going to start hitting the bottle hard. God bless her. Any takes on that, Bird?
Yeah, a little back and forth there. Going one way back, the end of episode 1, when Jeff's first wife, I thought that was very emotional. The Owen stuff was very good. I would say, hate to say well done for the situation, how close they were. That was known. I really enjoyed seeing some of the Owen stuff and Jarrett's stories of that. But when they started talking about the wife, that kind of hits home a little bit as far as the Family Guy and all that. And I thought that was pretty emotional to end on episode 1. They ended it very for TV purposes, but you kind of had a heart you're feeling for Jarrett, in my opinion, whether you're a Jarrett guy or not. I thought he came across well, at least to that point. You're kind of rooting that on.
Yeah. It was surprising how endeared that Joe was with the whole roster back then. Even Scott Steiner was pretty worked up about it.
Yeah, and to me, I'm throwing this out there. Scott Steiner's reaction obviously seemed very real. Did Vince Russo seem a little disingenuous? Because he seemed like he was having a harder time with it than Jeff did. I don't know if anybody wants to go back, watch that, and correct me. You may not have caught it on first pass, but knowing we're dealing with a bullshit artist, do you have any takes on that, Bird? Do you think he was pretty genuine there, or what?
First, I'll jump on Steiner. That was a highlight that surprised me, that you kind of got the real Scott Steiner. He was emotional, got out of his seat. He was half crying. I didn't expect Steiner. Usually we see him 90% of the time in character. A lot of these guys. That came across pretty real. Even Russo, who I think sometimes can be goofy, he's a gimmick. I don't hate Russo. I really don't. But you could tell he was touched, but you don't know how much he was playing into that. So you're it's a give and take to what's real and what's not. How deep was he close to his family or not?
I feel like that guy's always working.
Yeah.
Tom, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, like I said before, I thought that whole part with Jill was surprising with how attached everybody was to her. Vince Russo, I really have not that many opinions about him, bro, but he
Yeah.
makes for good TV, that's for sure.
He was someone that I wanted to like. And you think the way he built himself up from the Attitude era, but you see everything that he's produced since then, and it's hard not to see Cornette vindicated. When I first saw their pissing match, I didn't really have a dog in the fight, but the more you kind of get into it, Cornette's more right than he's wrong there, at
I didn't
least.
know they did all that stuff. Like they showed the Vince Russo parts. I didn't know they did all that stuff.
Bird, what was your take on the midget whacking it in the trash can? Where's that?
Which one is the midget like a bad word to say now or something like that? They kept censoring it.
Yeah, they did. So little people, but yeah, midget was bleeped, I think. Go ahead, Bird. You want?
Yeah, so I'm not above Russo trying to push the edge a little bit, but I think he goes 100 miles an hour all the time, and he wants to do that all the time. So
was that
time, it was more of a Southern crowd at that time, in my opinion. I don't know if that's the place you wanted to roll New York style and just throw that kind of stuff on TV. Not that it offended me, but it's okay.
Was that Velvet Sky who was doing the interview, or who was that? Could you tell that girl?
Ooh, I couldn't tell if she was there that early or not, but
I wouldn't think it would have been her. I
Yeah.
wouldn't think it would have been her that early, but yeah, I think the porridge line was maybe a step too far. So, and to that point, we very early on get the exchange with Jerry Jarrett. Now, I've listened to some of Cornette's takes on this, but I don't fully understand. Did Jerry Jarrett have Memphis before Jerry the King Lawler took over, or how did that all work, Bird?
So basically, by that time, when Jarrett took over from Goulas, we're talking 70s range, late 70s. And I'm not going to be overly nerd guy, but I love Memphis. That's one of my favorite all-time promotions. Even current Memphis, I watch every week. So one time, I'm not sure when it started, Lawler booked for 6 months, Jarrett booked for 6 months. So you'd have a couple of different styles of things, even though they were somewhat similar, but they kind of didn't have to book 24/7, 365, which I think that helped that promotion. And they had a lot of stars there that interacted together. But Jarrett was a real smart dude. I'm talking Jarrett's dad. As far as knew the business, obviously was a wrestler, promoter. He's done every aspect of the game on that level. And I think he got fairly big time as far as to what he could get. Was he Vince? Obviously, no. I'm not saying that.
What was his relationship with Teeny Jarrett? Because I've heard Cornette talk about Teeny Jarrett. He's very high on her, but did they have a relationship, or what was she running exactly?
She was running tickets at that time early on, and I think she got into a little bit of promoting, but I'm not sure how much actual promoting she was doing, or if that's more Corny kind of elevate, because Corny loved her, and I don't know if he saw she's the first female promoter or one of the first to do it to that level. Maybe I'm not sure details on far as her aspect and for her Jerry's aspect.
Yeah, I think you'd have to take that up with Cornette and The Rock and the WWE Hall of Fame and see whose grandma did what. But so that's kind of Jarrett's start. He gets $300 concessions. He debuts at Memphis in '86. I think permed Jarrett is maybe the best Jarrett, like the long, permy, frizzy hair, which he seemed to have back then. When did you start watching Jarrett on your end, Bird?
As far as Memphis of that era, I didn't get it on TV in my area. I was more of a tape trader guy come the 90s. So I watched a bunch of it after the fact. But probably early WWF was when I first saw Jarrett on that scale. But looking back, like Corny said, he was a good looking dude. He was great in the ring. I thought he could talk well. I agree with all that.
Now, did you like the original Jeff Jarrett character? How did you stand on that?
Like before WWF, you talking
No,
about?
in WWE, the With My Baby Tonight Dog and Pony show. Where did you land there?
Me personally, I love it. We can probably all quote that song, whether good or bad, but I thought he played that role very well for sports entertainment side. I liked it personally, but I could see how it could be cheesy, especially looking back now 30 years later. But I liked it personally. I thought he was in a good role.
I think they on it more than they needed to. And like you take a character like Razor Ramon, I don't see that they were much different, just even in the build and how they got over, and they both got over. Like they said, Jarrett never could have been a main event guy or in WWE, but I still think he would have got there if he hung in there at least as much as Billy Gunn in the later run. Go ahead.
argument there. I say once Jarrett got to WCW, he was taken a little more seriously, maybe. Even though WWF had him fairly high there for a while, I think he was more of a serious wrestler by the time he was doing the
Because
WCW run.
well,
Southern wrestling.
That's yeah, but Russo was gonna elevate him no matter what. And I think that's when he made the switch, right? And so that was probably a background conversation beforehand. Tom, when did you start watching Jarrett, and what was your take on him?
My first recollection of him was the Double J, the country singer. I don't know, did he do anything beforehand in WWF, Bird?
No, it started with that.
Oh, just with that? Okay. Yeah, I thought it was fun, but having that kind of a gimmick was WWF back then too. But then he transitioned to the Attitude Era, Jeff Jarrett, where he started Slap Nuts thing. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
I feel like Slap Nuts, was that only WCW?
Oh, really?
Was the WWF the Don't Piss Me Off stuff?
Yeah, Don't Piss Me Off for sure. Yeah. And then the Stroke and Slap Nuts and all that stuff, I think was the WCW run. Okay. But yeah, he had the lighted glasses. Now, Bird, you're a Flair fan, but I don't remember how much Flair really strutted in his WWE timeline.
Yeah,
I feel like I knew it was similar to a Flair strut back then, but it was more exaggerated. Am I accurate in saying that? Or how would you examine or describe the Jeff Jarrett strut in WWE, Bird?
He had a little more gimmicky to it, I would say. He just kind of...
And I would say Vince probably juiced them up on it. That would be my guess. But I actually love the Jeff Jarrett strut. I love the Double J. I love the With My Baby Tonight. I think it got Road Dogg initially over. I get he floundered for a little bit after, but that's where he got his start. I don't think, once again, I think Vince gets the wrong side of the stick for a lot of things, because I think most of this worked. And I was a big fan of Don't Piss Me Off, Jarrett. I wasn't a fan of him losing to China, but I wasn't a fan of her being in the men's division at all. But even now, they're like, when a woman can at least work with a man at a similar work rate, I like it more than what was going on back then. But totally understand him having to give up the belt. But I still think he would have kept ascending if he didn't get pulled then. Do you slightly disagree with that, Bird?
Depends which way you go with it. But I think I give Vince a lot of credit for that, because he wrote it better than you would think. Looking back, you wouldn't think he was a Jarrett guy. And whether he was or not, I think he understood the level that he was. And I thought Jarrett,
I think what we know about Vince is that he probably wouldn't have made Jarrett a main event guy, because he wasn't that, even though he wasn't small, midget size or whatever, but he still wasn't a Vince guy.
I disagree in these regards. Is it true that he brought in Jerry Jarrett to book when he was dealing with the steroid stuff? Is that accurate, Bird?
They talked about bringing him in. I'm not sure if he actually went through with it, but Jarrett was the option B if that came to that, if he got in trouble. I'm not sure if Jarrett actually landed there or not.
That shows a huge amount of trust there. And if you look at the time period, Jeff Jarrett came in not much after that. And I would just say they tried to push both Val Venus and Billy Gunn to the main event level after Jarrett left. So I think he would have been certainly above Venus and at least an equal push to...
I think maybe Venus was up there because of his gimmick.
No,
during that time,
I think this is around the start time. Maybe you started fading off though, Tom. But after they tried to do a world title push with him right before Edge, I would say it all reminds me of the Dolph Ziggler run, right? They try to do it, but it doesn't quite get too far. But all you can hope for is that opportunity. So I could be totally foolish. I just think he would have got the same opportunity that Billy Gunn and Val Venus got, and what you do with that opportunity is up to you. But as it was, he ended up going to the WCW, Vince Russo, Jarrett stuff ad nauseum. I was surprised how short that section was here, though. Or we didn't at least get a title card like, go see this episode for more of this. Were you surprised they didn't really get into that at all, Bird?
Maybe a little. I thought they touched a lot more WWF than they did any of Russo and WCW with Jarrett, but I think it was still more of a push on TNA, so maybe that's why we didn't get a lot of those years.
Yeah. Now, as far as Owen goes, where were you when you found out about Owen Tom? Were you watching? Did you have a reaction to that? What was your Owen take at the time?
I remember. I think I wasn't watching the pay-per-view. But I don't think I remember hearing about it until maybe the Raw the next day, and then watching the
Okay.
Raw afterwards. And then
Okay.
I remember just watching the Raw and got really emotional about it too.
Yeah. Where were you on that, Bird?
I was actually watching live in my room. We probably had 4 or 5 guys with us, pizzas, everybody pitches in kind of deal. We got every pay-per-view, just a bunch of us. And when it happened, you're just everybody just kind of staring at the TV like, what in the world's going on? And you don't really process it. Of course, we were however old we were at that time, 20-year-old kids, and didn't really know until JR started bringing a little bit more to it. And even then, it just felt kind of odd. Something bad was messed up, even though he projected him as dead. You're watching, and the show goes on. You're like, okay.
Yeah, back then, the internet wasn't as quick as it is now. So I don't remember reading about it until way later or something like that.
Yeah, I was on a board pretty regularly, or I think they kind of aggregated like Observer or other places, but I was on, it was Raja, WWF.com or whatever back then, but all the time. So they were pretty up to date with info. But I would say I really liked Owen and I liked the blue blazer gimmick. And I would just like to take this time. I feel like a lot of times people, once again, they paint Vince a certain way, like he was just trying to trash Owen with this blue blazer gimmick. But it's like, seen Hulk Hogan with that gimmick. We've just seen right now in current wrestling a similar gimmick as one of the most popular gimmicks in all of wrestling. And it's something you would say would be a Vince gimmick. And I don't even think he was around when this gimmick was given to El Grande. But it was very similar to that. And I loved it back then. I remember he was my favorite wrestler at that time outside of Stone Cold. I don't know if he was injured or what was going on at that time, but I really appreciated Blue Blazer, was very disappointed. You could tell the next day Jeff was pretty broken up, I think, on the tribute show. I feel like I remember that. But yeah, just a bummer overall. Any other thoughts on Owen before we pass on this, Bird?
I'll jump in. Blue Blazer, I thought he played it well. Wasn't one of my favorite Owen characters. Now I like Nugget Owen. Enough is enough. It's time for a change. Give me that. Kind of where you're kind of hating him, and he that was his vibe in my opinion. And very smooth in the ring, obviously. But that was my personal favorite Owen character, was that one over Blue
Wasn't
Blazer.
he the Blue Blazer before he became Owen Hart?
No,
Yes.
No, his original back in 87, 88 or something like that. Yeah. But yeah, I think I just hated his caution music, really bothered me. So I liked the quotes, but definitely that theme music was not my favorite period of time till at least when they put the words in, it was a little better. But he is not a nugget. They show the buyout. They talk about Vince never forgiving Jeff, but once again, he still hired him like, I don't know, 20 years later. So questionable there. RE never forgave, but they're like, if Vince will humiliate you. And I thought that was more funny. It's not like he had him join the Kiss My Ass Club. I think that's well played when you hold somebody up on your way out. Like you get it back going the other way.
And I'm sure he knew that Vince didn't want another Medusa incident with the belt.
Yeah. So here's something that I heard Cornette say that I think made a lot of sense. He said when he heard about this, that he knew it would never be a competitor to WWE, but he thought it would be a good alternative. And I think that was the right perspective. And I think sometimes now it's AEW and WWF, and before it was you get this tribalization of fans. But I think that's a real logical take. Like it would be very hard, even whatever your opinion of the WWE product is right now, to overtake it. But I think just being an alternative can be good enough if you're happy with that. If you don't understand that's what you're doing, and that's I think what we see later with Dixie. But what's your take on that, and how did you see that at the time, Bird? And were you hoping it would compete with WWE, or what was your feelings at the time?
I don't think anything at that time, or even up till today's years, there's no true competition. But it's good to have some, like I said, some alternatives. And I think Jarrett understood that on the lower end. I don't think he was probably fired up at Vince, probably wanted to show him what he was all about. But I don't think true down he was going to compete with him. Now Dixie, she's on another planet. Maybe I don't dislike Dixie, but I don't think she just understood the element, and maybe she thought she was competing against Vince. And I think even at that time, Vince, they were just a small peon.
Yeah, I was always hoping Vince would eventually buy them for the video library because I just always like I still feel like if they would sell their video library to WWE, maybe not now because WWE doesn't even know what it's doing with its own library sometimes, but especially in the WWE network days, I think that would have been very good for a lot of fans to see some of that wrestling that they missed, and it's just kind of lost unless you want to look it up on YouTube or you get one of Bird's Faces of Death USB drives or whatever whatever USB tape trading he's doing these days. But so they got the money from a Richard Scrouchy from Hell South. Have you guys ever heard of Hell South?
Not till late after the fact. I know it's big down there, but I didn't know this guy's name at the time or even much about that, and especially how big they said it was.
I feel like it sponsored a whack tournament or something. I had a UNLV t-shirt with a sponsorship or something, but that's the only time I'd ever heard of it. So apparently they didn't get too far into it in the show, but a quick search said it was like a $2.7 billion accounting scheme, which I guess makes sense because, like, why would a company like Health South like that want to fund a wrestling promotion? It just seems weird to begin with. Any thoughts on that, Tom?
Yeah, I have no clue about it. I don't think I remember reading about it either, because when they were talking about having their funding issues and all that, that's the first time I remember ever hearing about it. And again, I was just mainly stuck on WWF back then. And when I just came back into regularly watching wrestling, I was, again, still stuck on WWF. So all of this was new information to me. So I have no clue about this company that back then, but he made it work.
And did you know, like, when I remember reading in what fans would call the dirt sheets or whatever, but I remember reading about Panda Energy. And if you think
I remember the name, yeah.
If you think back to 2000 or so, in my idiot brain, I was thinking these guys do energy drinks or something. At the time, there's a new energy drink every day, but I think we're in Texas oil industry or that kind of stuff, which makes a lot more sense, which I realized that as I was watching this, but I was always thinking, what energy drinks were they selling and how did they have money from it? Any takes on Health South or Panda Energy from you, Bird?
It seemed like, at least story presentation for TV, they kind of fell into each of those situations. That according to Jarrett, they were on that last week. They had to do the TV show, and here comes Health South out of nowhere. This big money comes in. Same thing, whether it turned upside down with Dixie later, but they were a helping spot with her and her dad. They obviously a big money backer, which you needed. So as far as that goes, I think they both were helpers at the time, obviously, because there was money there. But we heard more probably about Dixie's family than we did Health South, in my opinion.
Now, Russo claimed credit for TNA, the name. But there was a tag team before all of this, which was Tested Albert, was TNA with Trish Stratus. Now, Russo maybe came up with it in WWE, but they kind of just, I feel, obviously TNA was a term, but in wrestling, that's the first time I remember a TNA. Any take on the name or the partnership with NWA? Did that mean anything to you, Bird?
I'm an NWA guy. Even at that time, it was dying down pretty heavy. It's rebuilt a little bit off and on since that. I think that was a good thing they did. But like all the reactions of people at the time, when you think TNA, obviously you're not thinking wrestling. Okay. And even if you're not, I'm thinking straight up, he's the one named it, but that's total Russo kind of stuff. And that's what he wanted presented. So here we go.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, when I see the first little bit of this, to me, it looks like all of the nightmares of the end of WCW all over again. You've got midgets in the trash can winking off. You've got Toby Keith hitting Goldberg suplexes at the end. Was that the Wall? Was that the other tall guy we saw in there?
Yeah, yes.
I think it's amazing that it got as far as it did for sure. And I did not know. I knew a little bit of the Dixie stuff, but I didn't know how on edge it was as early as it was, different things like that.
And again, it's Jeff Jarrett telling his side of the story too.
and Russo pitching in, but
And
Russo said he wanted no rules, anything goes, which is Cornette calls it lazy booking. He says he wanted an adult version of Glow. And then we see there was like the Johnsons, Operation Sex. Do you remember any of that, Bird? And was it funny to you then when you were 20?
Probably in a small dose, but you didn't want that all the time. That's 20-year-old guy kind of humor, but you got to have some, being a wrestling guy, you wanted just a balance. Even today's wrestling, I want some goofy stuff. I want some funny stuff, some stronger stuff, but I don't want all of that as my show.
Feel like the Johnsons ever would have been funny. Yeah. It's funny not being funny, but in practice, it's, you know, it reminds me of the Ninja Turtle thing that Vince did, but worse. So yeah, some of that's going on. And at one point he's got somebody with a gun in the ring. I think it was the little person's got a gun. There was a lot of crazy stuff happening. We get the Jerry Jarrett and the Vince Russo oil and water thing. Totally makes sense that it would be oil and water. I think Jeff Jarrett's idea that having both of them kind of like what you were talking about with Jerry the King Lawler and Jerry Jarrett, like if they did half a show or 6 months on, 6 months off, something like that may work. But I think it's pretty clear that those two people wouldn't be able to work together. And he ends up kind of pulling the rug by doing it was Vladimir Kozlov that was the wrestler. Bird, going off the top of my head.
I can picture the guy in my head, but
between like Heidenreich and all these, but I'm pretty sure it's Vladimir Kozlov. I remember seeing that when it dropped on WWE.com and being like, was like certainly not as big as like when Cody went to WWE, but it was like something going on there. Do you remember any of that? Where do you stand on Vince Russo as a booker? I know you say you don't hate him, but he, to me, on his own has never been a successful booker. How would you go with that, Bird?
I think he can be a good branch of a tree, but I don't want to, if you give him that full power, I think it's just going to be a complete circus. And that could be just funny and a bad way to watch for a couple of weeks, but you're not going to sustain in the long term, in my opinion, obviously. But I think he could help, but you got to tone him down a little bit. And even as a corny guy,
yes. What was that, Tom?
Even Russo himself said how he wanted to book a show. He was like, "This is for TV, bro."
I thought there was a point where other people were talking about Russo, and there's some bros thrown in there that was funny. So 2005, they end up on Spike, which used to have ECW, used to have WWE. It was TNN at one point. So there's some Nashville roots involved. I would imagine Dixie probably, there was some tie there because she was in PR. I felt like I always remember her having some of those Nashville ties or those kinds of things. I don't really know. They didn't cover it. They kind of skipped from 2002 to 2005 on TV pretty quick. Is that the point they got the six-sided ring, Bird, was right when they went to TV there? Or do you really remember?
I'm not sure when six-sided started. Definitely wasn't early on, but it was a little more production-wise when all that came out. And it looked a little better on TV, so it wasn't the janky stuff you saw early on.
And then the X Division, they would do the belt with the cables over the ring. And it usually be like an opener kind of deal. I think their first real pay-per-view they did, and by that, not weekly, but the first time they did a real monthly pay-per-view is probably the first one I bought, I feel like. Oh, I did want to say one funny story. He talked about on that first show how the ring broke on his first show. And I had a small indie promotion in Vegas. And our very first show, the ring broke during the main event. And there was like a huge hole in one corner sucking everybody in. And I'm at my first show and the rings totally broke. So I could definitely, they worked the match with one corner of the ring had a hole in it, damn near. So that was interesting. What did you make, just closing that thought out, Bird, what did you make of Jerry Jarrett? I didn't realize it at the time. That was his way to get out of his contract. Pretty creative, right?
Yeah. I thought that was pretty slick. Yeah, for a way to do it. I'm going to try this, throw it against the wall. Whatever happens, it's not going to bother me. But yeah, it's pretty good out.
And it almost seems like Vince played along with it, or that's kind of what they said. And that's what I think I guess it's not in vogue to talk well of Vince McMahon, but there's a little bit more to that relationship than we see here based on some of the things we've heard and said about Jerry Jarrett maybe going to take over if he went to trial. There's got to be a deeper relationship there than we know, and they don't really touch on that at all. His wife eventually passes of cancer. They do touch on, now here's where I'm confused. The rumor, the thing that people always say, and I feel like Jeff Jarrett's always said, is that Taylor Swift babysat his daughters. But the way they describe it in this show is she knew about the sick mom and performed for them one day at the house. Is that how you took they were presenting it in the show, Bird? Or what did you heard different? Or what did you make of that?
For years, we've always heard the babysitting story. So I've always just latched onto that. Anybody else, but they didn't really lock into that. So
yeah,
I was confused as well by.
So I was starting to think it wasn't babysitting; it was like a make-a-wish performance. Any thoughts from you there, Tom?
Yeah, all I've heard was the babysitter. So the whole other thing that's surprising to me too. But it's Jeff Jarrett talking, so who knows how much of it is true and how much of it is just playing up for himself.
Yeah, and I don't feel like he's the biggest storyteller, but the more I think about it, he's probably not a storyteller either. He's no Hogan, but
there's still one episode left too, so who knows how much they'll touch about wrongs that he's done.
And we didn't talk a ton about it, or we already did talk a lot about it, but them doing creative at Jeff's house while he's treating his wife was pretty brutal. And I assume that's why some of those people would have been so emotional as well. But she ended up passing the same day as Owen. And we find out that Jarrett didn't come to the funeral. And we really didn't get any, I don't know if it comes in the later episode, but we don't get any resolution to their relationship. Any thoughts there, Tom?
Yeah, I think they briefly mentioned the mom too, saying the mom wasn't a fan of wrestling and she didn't show up for the funeral either. So a rocky relationship overall with the Jarretts.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you there, Bird?
I didn't really deep dive too much into that, but just kind of seemed odd even years ago that we knew that they weren't talking, but just seems like crazy when it's been several years, or Jeff saying 2-3 years or wherever it was till they talked again and all that stuff. So I didn't like seeing any of that, but I'm not sure how deep that was or what really drew the knife in the sand there to.
Yeah, I thought Jim Cornette kind of put a level-headed exclamation point on it. He just said that Jerry Jarrett was a great promoter, great wrestler, not a perfect person. And I think that could be true of any of us. Jarrett right back to work. Dixie liking her time as the figurehead. But Jeff still was the largest individual shareholder, he said. But I'm wondering if that's a way for him to control the narrative, because how could he have gotten, did he have 34% and Dixie had 33 and her dad had 33? I'm like, I'm trying to imagine, as largest individual shareholder doesn't matter unless you've either got a super majority clause in the contract or you've got a majority by yourself, but they don't mention any other shareholders. Any thoughts there, Bert, or had you ever heard anything about that?
One thing that kind of took me aback on Jarrett's side, and I guess I kind of get it, he acted like he was totally blindsided, but you got the Carters coming in with all this money. Of course, Dixie wants to be a TV person. She wants to be involved. He acted like they just took it away from him totally. Maybe they did. But I think at that time, they had the money. That's the power. So whether they wanted the whole booking and all that, if Jarrett was really out how he said he was, or if he was really more down with some outside substance stuff going on, just tied into everything else, I wonder that.
Yeah, he mentions in the middle of it was another one of his low points. Obviously, after his wife dies, totally get it.
Yeah.
But he openly said at different times, here's a low, here's another low. So it's what position she was in. Now, I put the history together. So they present Kurt Angle as really the first big move for Impact outside of existing stuff, but I feel like maybe their first attempt, and I don't know that they really did or not, but I remember when Lesnar left, he went to Japan. I think he had a no compete in the US, so that's probably how he got out of that. Christian was actually the first one to make the jump, and then Angle did after that. Do you remember both those guys coming in? I felt like obviously Angle's the bigger wrestler, but in a different way, like when Cody went to WWE, Christian was almost the biggest one to almost break free, you know what I mean, and make that decision to switch over. What do you remember of that, Bird?
I think that area is a little more national, a little more recognized. Not that everybody knew of the company, but a little better presented. And of course, you saw the night when Angle came out, the pop he got was huge. Even Corny said he was so beat up, he would, whether he's taking pills at that time, he probably was, all that, and he'd come the next night and just put on a classic. So Angle was Angle regardless. Even when he was beat up toward the end of his career, he could go. It was like a machine.
Now, I forget who the other producer was on the show that was in a lot, but he was talking about how real the Samoa Joe stuff looked. I don't know that end with Angle looked as real as he described it to look, but at this time, Tom, you weren't really watching TNA, right? But you're somehow a Samoa Joe fan. You weren't watching any wrestling at this point, right? And when did you start liking Samoa Joe?
I think I heard about Samoa Joe when he was like bigger in the later years of TNA, and that's when I was started watching wrestling again. Okay. So I just seen the highlights of him in TNA in the later TNA years. So I thought he was pretty cool back then, and obviously everybody was talking him up. I was more the IWC in that crew back then, so everybody talking up about the indie guy. So I was like, oh, he seems pretty cool.
Oh, you and Bird, just whatever indie guy they talk up, you guys like.
Go Indies, let's go.
I remember Jericho did the fake out like he might do TA, and I guess they did have conversations in 2007. I don't remember if the countdown, but like when he came back as Jericho again was probably around 2007, 2008, one of his re-signed kind of deals. He goes on a tour, fakes like he's leaving, and comes back kind of dog and pony show.
One question. The guy that you mentioned, Scott D'Amore, Bird, isn't he the guy right now in WWE that does all the cinematic matches?
No.
Yeah. You're thinking Abyss, who was a wrestler in TNA. I think he's part of that reel.
Yeah, he is.
D'Amore,
I think there might even be
the Canadian. He got
there might even be another guy, but yeah, D'Amore got.
I'm just saying because what he said about Samoa Joe rising up and being bloody, looking so awesome like that, it reminds me of the AJ Styles and Undertaker scene.
Oh yeah.
So I thought that's what. That's why.
Yeah, D'Amore eventually took over TNA, and then he got booted on some. What would you call Me Too allegations, Bird? Mm-hmm. It was post Me Too, but I don't want to call him Tommy Dreamer allegations, but whatever it was. But there's a lot of people that seem to think he's a good guy. Isn't he dating a wrestler, Bird, or was he at the time?
Who, D'Amore?
Yeah, I feel like he was fishing from the pier a bit, but I don't know.
Possibility. I don't know one way or another on that.
I had always heard that he did say that international sales were booming. I had always heard TNA's international was good. That might have just been stuff they were putting in the dirt sheets. There's later a story planted by Dixie on the Angle Jarrett stuff, it seems. So if she is planting that story, I'm sure she is planting a lot of them. Her background was PR. So makes sense. But what did you think of the Knockouts division? Were you an Awesome Kong person, Bird? Anybody else that really struck your fancy?
She was one that came off fantastic on the show, number one. I thought she's real. Everybody that's seemed to meet her over the years said she's fantastic. Her and Gail Kim put on quite a feud. I was a big fan of that stuff. So they were, of course, you had a little bit of the WWE element. They weren't quite full on with the women's revolution, but I thought that was a big start they had there.
So was it true that they were the first women's revolution type matches that they had before WWE?
I would say presentation wise, WWE at that time even got away from bra and panties, but they weren't quite putting on technical classics either.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a difference between the NXT class that came up with Charlotte and Paige and Sasha and Bayley. I think that was just a different level, but I definitely think I at least heard about this. You know what I mean? The Knockouts.
Yeah, TNA Knockouts, they got a buzz, and from whatever they always said, they got the great ratings, even mentioned that on TV. So there was a buzz to that. So I think there was something there. And I enjoyed it personally.
Now,
back then on the outside, the only thing I remember hearing about the Knockouts division was the beautiful people and their entrance. That's it.
I believe that from you. So, as far as Cornette goes, he came on for a bit. We hear about Dutch. Dutch is eventually, I didn't know he was so close to Jarrett. He's eventually pushed out. What was the difference between Ring of Honor and TNA at this point, Bird? Because, like, at some point there's a Ring of Honor overlap, and other than the Russo stuff or bringing Hogan in or the knockouts, a lot of the best parts of TNA wrestling, I would say you probably could have found on either show. How would you describe the two of them?
ROH was strictly, and they had great storylines. I was a big ROH guy too. More traditional mat-based wrestling. It'll be hard hitting. You get more of a Japanesey kind of style, indie style, more taken serious, more so than a Russo kind of vibe. Russo can make stars. I'm not sure how big of a stars on that level that some of those ROH guys were. Of course, all of them we can name what they are nowadays. Match-wise, it was just pretty much strictly that. I highly enjoyed it. He had a great crowd environment. There just wasn't the goofy stuff with ROH, in my opinion.
Got it. Now, where we get to is as the ratings are going up, Dixie wants more control. Like, to your point, Bird, she gets him out of the video game call. Like, he had to have known stuff was coming, but who knows? We say Dixie didn't get interviewed or her point of view on the show, but if anybody was a Dixie guy, maybe it seemed like it might have been D'Lo. And certainly Awesome Kong wasn't trashing her at all. They described how Nash was trying to gas her up and she was saying she was going to compete with Vince. And I think Sinister Minister described her as swimming with carny sharks. For as much as she thought she got over on Jeff, maybe Vince Russo and Jeff, like this is a quote from Karen Jarrett later, that they were maybe protecting her. I would say is probably partially true because even in my small experience with my wrestling TV show that I did, people are just always looking to see what money they can get out of who sometimes. Any thoughts on that, Bird?
I think, of course, there are a lot of sharks in the tank. You hit that spot on. As far as your Nat, whatever people think of Nash, he's a overly smart wrestling business kind of guy, in my opinion. Maybe he's not done everything the right way, but man, he's come out looking pretty and pretty much everywhere he goes. And I think he's a pretty good manipulator. Not just him, but that whole circle of guys had Dixie by the hand and she went with it.
Yeah, and I forget the story he told, but I think it was probably in the Hogan doc, and that's where some of the end of this episode runs together a little bit with the Hogan doc. But I think the thought was we get from the Hogan doc, we don't get it from this yet. We haven't seen the Hogan stuff, but in that they say that the thought was they wanted more of Hogan in ring, and at that point he was only going to be like, the way Jarrett described him is he thought Hogan would be best as like a mascot kind of thing almost. Yeah. But I think there was also a cool on that special or another where Nash kind of described whatever deal he got out of her being pretty extreme. What's your guys' thoughts on her kind of taking over in the Karen Jarrett stuff and then leading into the Hogan stuff? Bert, I'll get your take on that first.
I'll say Dixie PR, and far as character-wise on TV, I thought she presented herself well. Good-looking woman, as far as that goes. She just didn't know the business.
Not quite old enough for you, but young for you.
But I thought she came across well on TV, but she eventually was on there too much without really knowing a whole lot. Had a lot of people in her ears, I'm sure. But I don't think she's badly looked upon as far as cringeworthy. She just caught in the wrong spot sometimes, and then she wanted that power, I'm sure, once she got some TV time, maybe. But I would have loved just to have a little bit of a dose of actually Dixie's talking, which I get wasn't going to happen. But that would have really expanded this whole series.
I think my favorite part, it was around when they were talking about Russo booking Shark Boy in a fish tank. And that's what they're like, bro, let's book Shark Boy in a fish tank. Bro, let's do this. We got the quote from Cornette on him being fired, but also possibly over a terroristic threat. Do you remember seeing any of that in the dirt sheets? I believe the letter happened, but do you know if it happened before or after he got fired, Bird? Or do you have any recollection?
I don't know the time frame. I know that was a talk, and I remember reading all that, but I'm not sure where to place that.
But I guess the letter said if I could kill Vince Russo and get away with it, I would. Cornette describes it as him calling the FBI because he's a moron, but he knew he hated him. What did you know anything about the Karen and Jeff Jarrett and Kurt Angle stuff? Tom, or were you totally out of the loop on that ever? Or
Time I was out of the loop, but I remember reading about it later on, like I think probably after TNA dissolved. I remember reading about it, but at the time I didn't really hear. And to be fair, I wasn't really paying attention to them at all, so I wouldn't have known at all. But going back to the whole Kevin Nash thing, that what he was when he was schmoozing up with Dixie, that would be a total Kevin Nash thing to say too.
I'm kind of wondering, they talk about it leaking to the dirt sheets, but they also show it on leaking on Bubba the Love Sponge, which we know that's a Hogan guy. Certainly a Nash would have had access to that. What was your take? I didn't have an opinion or a full understanding on how it happened. I think my only thoughts were Kurt Angle would be one of the last people I would want to hook up with his wife or ex-wife, like back then. Like, I would think he would legitimately potentially kill somebody. What did you know about that? And do you have any thoughts on it, Bird?
For TV purposes, Jarrett played it off, and even Karen, that it would just kind of happen and there wasn't a whole lot of screwiness going on. That's real life. I'm sure there's some stuff there. I don't know how on the outs her and Angle were. I'm sure they maybe were. Who's the judge that? I don't know, but it was definitely a talk. I read about all that, but you never know what's true and when the starting point would be and when they actually got together officially, or if they what got all messed up and how life was at the time for them.
So Dixie, based on that relationship, somehow outs him. Once again, there's got to be a little bit more to the story there, but she brings him back for the Hogan meeting and then immediately puts him back on the shelf. That does seem a little wonky, but why even go? Question for you on the Hogan stuff. Did you care, Tom? You were original Hogan guy. Did you ever care when he went to TNA? He pretty much could not, everyone knew he could not wrestle by the time he had that last run in WWE, I feel like. Where were you on that, Tom?
I remember hearing about him going to TNA and all that. I didn't really care because after that point, he was already a WCW guy at that point to me.
Okay.
So it didn't really matter to me at all. But
it checked out during his Mr. America run and all that stuff.
Yeah,
you weren't
I don't
watching.
remember that at all. Yeah.
But I knew that Shawn Michaels match, yes, Shawn Michaels intentionally exposed him. But at that point, I think it was because he literally couldn't do a lot at that point. And that was several years before this. So we're going to get more into this next episode. But as much as they say Jeff is like, Hogan didn't know anything about TNA, TNA didn't know dick about Hogan because they're expecting him to wrestle ever. He had told everyone. And if he was going to spend it, I feel like he would have got a Vince check over a TNA check. I feel like he just juiced this for money. I almost feel like that's what he said in the doc almost, but I don't quote me on that.
I mean, it would make sense if that's how the scenario played out. Like how you were saying they wanted him to be like a mascot, and then he probably got wind of it, and that's why he probably had Bischoff with him at that meeting.
I think the way they played it in the documentary, if I remember this correct, and if you remember anything different, Bird, let me know. But I think it was around the time of the divorce and he was flat broke. And so I think that's how he kind of rebounded, but and I think maybe even he alluded to being able to wrestle, but he was never going to be able to really wrestle.
And I think even on your national average person or average fan at that time, they're still thinking WWF Hogan from 1985. I think it dismissed all those older years, and we knew at that time he was still a huge name. I think that was a good signing on name, but what can you do? I mean, it was mainly it had some buzz.
I'm joking, but it's like whoever signs LeBron this year, it's like,
gotcha.
But maybe signing LeBron in 3 more years, to be completely honest. But yeah, I had a couple more things here. I was surprised that Hogan went into TNA with Russo still there. I thought he for sure would have said, no, I don't, Russo goes or I go. I think he just knew him and Bischoff would out-politic him probably. But did that shock you at all, Burden? Did you have any takes on that? Because they clearly weren't going to be able to work together.
Yeah, I think Bischoff was that handcuff, whether how true that, but Bischoff was always with Hogan in those later years. And I think Bischoff's half carny at times, but I think he came off well. And I think he's done well for himself, obviously. I don't think he's an idiot, but he plays the game pretty well. So I think latching on to Hogan, not a bad thing, but I think Hogan's always latched on him as well. So it's a give and take. And I think that's probably a good move for both of them there.
Yeah, and I
That
think Bischoff's fairly smart. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah.
But wasn't the finger poke of doom Russo versus Bischoff thing?
That was a Russo.
Is it?
That was a Russo decision. Yeah, for sure. And with Jarrett. So
Yeah,
I think
Yeah.
so. A lot of history there. So I don't know how anybody thought that was gonna fly. And we kind of end this where Jeff says the games had only just begun. So apparently there's a power play in here that I'm unaware of, because as far as I knew, Dixie and Pan Energy had control of this thing till Scott Demore ended up with it or whatever was going on there. And I always thought it was like a corporate, wasn't it Access TV bottom at some point? Or
Yeah, at one time.
I thought they had a stake because of the TV network and stuff. So we'll see where next episode's going. You got a stack of notes there, Bird. Anything we didn't want to hit, you want to hit? Any final thoughts on this first episode?
Me being a big TNA guy, I was looking forward to this. I don't know, more so than some of the other ones, but I think this season's going to be pretty awesome. I think we hit everything very well. I thought we knocked that pretty well topic-wise, but everything I needed to.
Are you going to record the Missy Hyatt podcast from a trash can live from
Still like Missy, I can't help it. This is what it is. That should be a very interesting one right there, though.
Tom, any final thoughts for you this week?
It was interesting. I'm from the outside looking in with the whole TNA thing. So again, a lot of this stuff is new news to me. Bird, was TNA always in Orlando?
No, it was Nashville for the early years until they went to Orlando.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that Orlando was the impact zone, which we didn't talk about that, and they didn't really cover, but in our chat, it was a running chat. Like anybody with a fake wrestling name is just entered the, the impact zone. Like the alternative lifestyle warrior has entered the impact zone kind of deal.
Yeah, but from the outside, when I was back then, for me, all I thought was TNA was always a Dixie thing. I knew that Jarrett started it, but I thought Dixie ran it.
Yeah, and it seemed like some of the even wrestlers there shared some of that confusion, which was interesting for sure. Cool. We will be back weekly. There's 7 episodes, including this one being a 2-parter, so 7 weeks of this. So we will be back next week. And then Sundays, we also have Game of Thrones with me and Dan. So I hope you'll come back and listen for that and maybe learn something about some wrestling. Thank you guys for joining us this evening.
Thanks a lot, man.
Appreciate it.
Bert, the new Meltzer with his whole history.
Yeah.
Subscribe to Bird's newsletter, $14.99.
All right. See you guys later.
Awesome. Get hold of me.